sessions for the afternoon, and the first presentation will be, the state of atomic swaps. Yes.
Thank you. Hello everyone. Welcome to the next dev slot. I hope you're all not too tired from lunch. I can promise you it's going to be not a lot of hard math and a lot of pictures, so should be easy to follow. I want to start off with some history. So, to my knowledge, the first mention of atomic swap-like concepts was like in 2013 in a bitcointalk.org thread, where people started like debating how can we exchange coins across independent ledgers without having to trust the other party. And then there were a couple of comments on that thread. Every now and then someone was like, hey, has anybody implemented this whatsoever? But it got pretty quiet up until like last year or something, where then people started doing atomic swaps between all kinds of things. So Lightning Labs, for example, did this Bitcoin to Litecoin Lightning atomic swap. Then there was like all kinds of atomic swaps between Bitcoin mainnet, Ethereum mainnet, I think Bitcoin, Dogecoin, all kinds of things. So it's a pretty hot topic. And why do I care about it? So my name's Thomas. I'm a research engineer at the CoBlox research lab based in Sydney. And we are building the Comet protocol, which is a decentralized protocol that aims to connect blockchains with each other. And the way we achieve this is by chaining up atomic swaps, and then because they all use the same secret, or because they are all linked together, we can trustlessly exchange funds across multiple chains. So a main building block, or a very common building block for realizing an atomic swap, are hash time lock contracts. But actually, hash time lock contracts is not the abstraction that we should be talking about. What we should be really talking about are conditional transfers. And for a conditional transfer, we need some sort of secret and a timeout to actually get the funds back when we don't want to go down the path of revealing the secret. And so far, there's two major ways of how we can achieve this. The first one is by using scripting languages like Bitcoin scripts or Ethereum contracts. And the other thing is something that we've heard yesterday already with this pretty neat idea of scriptless scripts that Andrew Perlster came up with, which basically uses special signatures called adapter signatures and transient private keys. And I'm pretty sure this is not going to be the last thing or the last invention that we'll see how we can do conditional transfers, so there's probably going to be more in the future. So this is what a hash time lock contract could look like. So we can see we have the hash part over here, and all it does basically is it takes the input, puts it into the SHA function, and compares it against the predefined hash. And the second branch is basically the condition is the transaction has to be a certain number of blocks behind in order for this path to be valid. And everything after that is just a regular pay to public key hash transaction. So we compare the pub key hash and then we verify the signature in the end. So let's talk about atomic swaps. How do they work? Well, essentially we need 4 transactions and 2 conditional payments. So 2 of those 4 transactions are conditional payments. And this is what it could look like. So we have 2 players, Alice and Bob, and we're on 2 ledgers, Bitcoin and Litecoin, for example. And in a naive way, then Alice starts out with just sending an HTLC that pays Bob. And what this means is, in the example of Bitcoin scripts, she creates one of those scripts, puts in Bob's pub key hash, computes a secret that she keeps for herself for the moment, then hashes it, puts it in, creates a pay to script hash address out of it, and then sends money to this address. So this is what it means when you send an HTLC that pays Bob. Bob essentially does the same thing. He uses the same hash that Alice used, but puts in a different pub key hash and pays Alice on the Litecoin chain. Alice sees this, takes the secret, redeems the money on the Litecoin chain, and for that she has to reveal the whole script plus the input, meaning now the secret's on the blockchain, because everything's public, Bob can see it and take the money as well, right? So both got their money, they didn't have to trust each other, and everyone's happy. Except I'm not happy because this is actually a highly unfair protocol. And for those of you who are familiar with atomic swaps, they might already know what the problem is. The problem is, if Alice is a greedy person, and Alice monitors the exchange rate for Litecoin to Bitcoin on an exchange or somewhere else, and the exchange rate doesn't evolve in her favor, then what she does is she just waits for the timeout over here and takes the money back. And what do I mean with the exchange rate doesn't involve in her favor? Well, if we take a close look, we have some money locked in here and some money locked in here. So like 1 Bitcoin for like 100 Litecoin, whatever. And so this is an exchange rate, right? And it cannot change because it's on the blockchain. So we have a certain timeout over here, and let's say this timeout is like 6 hours, then the actual exchange rate that you would get somewhere else could be different, right? So you could like, maybe like the price of Bitcoin drops for whatever reason, and suddenly you only get like, less Litecoin for your Bitcoin. Then Alice would take it because this is still a good deal, right? So she gets more money that she would get somewhere else. But the other way around is also true. So in the financial world, we call something like this an option. Right? If you get the possibility to execute or to decide whether or not you want to execute something in the future, that's an option. And you have to pay for these kind of things because of this freedom of deciding. And in this case, Alice gets an option that she didn't pay for. So we've got an unfair protocol. What do we do about it? Well, we fix it. And it's a 3-step process to fixing this protocol. So first, we need to figure out what is the actual problem. Then we have this magic step 2, and then we profit, right? Well, I just couldn't resist, sorry. No, it's actually just 2 steps. So we attribute fault, and then we introduce punishment into our protocol. What do I mean with attribute fault? There is this property of uniquely attributable fault that is very important. And it means that if we want to punish someone, we actually want to be certain that we punish the right person, right? So if we punish Bob in 10% of the cases, even though he didn't do anything wrong, then it's a shitty punishment. So we want to be sure that we can uniquely and with certainty identify the person or the player who we want to punish. Which in this case is easy because we know that Alice is the person who didn't redeem this, release the secret. So we know that we have to punish Alice. So how do we do that? Luckily, we are already in a system that deals with money, so we can just make Alice lose money. Right? So we just take money from her if she behaves badly, and this is how we can punish her. The question is, on which chain can we punish Alice? If this step doesn't happen, can we tell on the Bitcoin chain whether or not this step happened? We cannot. The 2 chains are independent of each other, so we cannot punish Alice on the Bitcoin chain for something that she did or she didn't do on the Litecoin chain. So we need to punish her on the Litecoin chain, means we need to take away some collateral that she put up front that we can take away from her if she didn't behave and had bad behavior. So this brings us to revision 1 of how we can do atomic swaps. That should now be hopefully fair. So what's the difference between revision 1 and 2? If you're familiar with Git diffs, then you should be able to read this. Like what we introduce is, we introduce a second hash time lock contract, or could also be a conditional payment, doesn't really matter, that where Alice, instead of just sending the HTLC that pays Bob to the Bitcoin chain, she puts up collateral on the Litecoin chain. And she gets that back if she redeems the money. Sounds great, right? Because how is this collateral designed? Well, it's also a conditional payment. It uses the same condition. Right? It uses the same pre-image, the same hash that she used in the other hash time lock contract, except that the payout paths are reversed. So in the case that the secret is presented, the money goes to Alice, and in the case the timeout branch is activated, the money goes to Bob. Meaning, if Alice now tries to wait, and she waits until the timeout occurs, Bob gets the money. Means she loses in the case she commits the bad behavior, but she gets her money back in case everything's fine. So this is pretty cool, because this means Alice is now incentivized to redeem the hash time lock contract of Bob. Meaning Bob no longer has to trust Alice in order to not wait for the timeout, but actually go through with the whole thing. But now Alice has to trust Bob, which is bad. We don't want any trust. Why does Alice have to trust Bob? Well, if you look at this diagram, who forces Bob to do anything in this protocol? I mean, Bob could just wait for the timeout and then get free money. Who doesn't want free money? So this is also kind of like not ideal. So let's try another revision. Revision 2 of our atomic swap. We introduce another tweak. So what we actually want to achieve is we want Alice to be able to take her collateral back, but only as long as Bob didn't commit to the whole thing. And for this, these two transactions need to be in the same, or these two payments need to be in the same transaction. This could look like this. So Alice sends, as always, same step, Alice sends an HLC that pays Bob to the Bitcoin chain. Then she constructs a transaction that puts in her collateral, has an output that should be the sum of whatever is Bob willing to pay, plus her collateral. She partially signs the thing, sends it over to Bob, then Bob adds his funds and sends it to the chain. So with very bad painting skills, this could look like this. So we have a transaction, and Alice starts out with adding the collateral and giving the final output. And I'm sorry that I lied about no math. There's like a little bit of math. So the difference is 1 Litecoin, surprisingly. So the green stuff is what is signed by Alice. So Alice partially signs the whole thing, then sends it over to Bob, and then Bob can add the remaining Litecoin and send it to the chain. Now, this gives us actually both guarantees that we want, because Bob is now guaranteed that he has this transaction on his machine, and he can add an output, an input at any time. And when he sends it to the chain, he can be sure if the transaction is included, meaning his funds are spent, then Alice is incentivized to also take it out, and thereby Bob gets the secret, which is in the end what he wants. And Alice can cancel the whole thing by just spending the output somewhere else. Like, Alice can just spend this thing. As long as Bob didn't put it on the chain, it's not yet there. And if Bob just waits too long and Alice is like very impatient, then she just spends it somewhere else. And as soon as Bob then tries to include the transaction, it would be a double spend. It's rejected by the network. So, but some of you may think, but we have Lightning Network, which has super fast payments, so we don't have this problem, which is not quite true. So the argument would be, well, this whole option problem just exists because there's like a 6-hour time difference between the moment where the transaction hits the chain and the moment you actually have to redeem it because of the refund part. But the problem doesn't exist because of this big timeout, and thereby is not affected by having fast or slow transactions. It's caused by the underlying protocol just inherently being unfair. Like if the incentives don't match up, then no matter how fast your payments, you can always create an implementation that just delays revealing the secret, and thereby you again, you get this like this delay in revealing the secret, and thereby introducing this option problem. So now that we have fair atomic swaps, let's talk about privacy. How can we make atomic swaps private? And we've already heard it like once, yesterday I think. There is this really awesome thing that's called scriptless scripts that uses signatures instead of hash functions, and thereby makes it indistinguishable from regular transactions on the chain. So how can we use this for atomic swaps? Sorry, more math. So we have Alice and Bob, and they start off with their respective private key and some secret that only Alice knows in the beginning, right? So we start out with 1 Bitcoin on Alice's side and 10 Litecoin on Bob's side. And what Alice does is she computes an address that contains Bob's private key plus T. Now, she can actually do this without knowing Bob's private key. She can compute it from the public key. And Bob does something similar. He actually locks the funds in a multi-signature where they need both private keys, XA and XB, in order to redeem the money. So if we are at this stage, neither of them can spend any of this money because Alice doesn't know XB, so she cannot redeem the money that she locked in. Alice doesn't know XB over here as well. This is the same thing. So she cannot spend the money that Bob locked in. Bob knows XB, but doesn't know T, so he cannot spend that money. And he doesn't know XA, so he cannot spend that money either. So how do we proceed? So Bob creates this so-called adapter signature, where he creates a sort of partial signature on this thing, but he designs it in a way that in order to make it a fully valid signature, Alice has to include T in it. So Bob sends it over to Alice, Alice completes it, she doesn't learn XP through that, but what she gets is a fully valid signature on this for this transaction. So, but she's forced to reveal T in this case, which makes Bob able to learn it afterwards, and now everybody's happy because they can spend the funds. So the important thing here is that this actually has the exact same properties as an atomic swap with hash time lock contracts. Because Alice starts out with a secret that only she knows in the beginning, but she cannot take Bob's funds without atomically also revealing the secrets. And this is actually the only property that we care about. And both parties can also take their money back because they signed and lock time secured transactions up front for each other. So I want to conclude this with some open research questions that we faced while developing the commit protocol. And the first one is actually again about scriptless scripts. So as we saw from the last slide, scriptless scripts rely on signatures, right? And signatures are curve specific. So the question is there a way of how we can actually do scriptless scripts across two different chains, right? So like Bitcoin and Monero, or also Cardano, they use different chains. So is there a way to actually construct these signatures in a way so that we can use scriptless scripts to perform atomic swaps across these chains, even though they are not the same curve? And I mean, there's also, you might think, yeah, but Monero doesn't have an n-lock time equivalent feature, but if we at least can do the conditional part, then we're one step closer to actually doing atomic swaps. The second thing is, and this is where I'm getting back to the whole uniquely attributable fault thing, is how can we uniquely attribute fault if we are in a multi-hop payment channel? Now, this might seem like a big jump from like doing all this on-chain stuff and then suddenly going to payment channels, but actually all of what I said before is also valid for payment channels, so it doesn't really matter whether you're on-chain or not. Now, the problem that I'm talking about here is, again, some bad painting skills, but slightly better this time. Let's imagine we have Alice, Bob, and Charlie, and they all have set up payment channels on the Bitcoin and on Litecoin. And so the way the atomic swap should work out is Alice starts out with making a conditional payment to Bob. Bob continues forwarding it to Charlie. Then Charlie follows up with still using the same condition, forwarding it to Bob on Litecoin, and then going to Alice as the final node. So once all of this is set up, we are actually at the phase where Alice should now start revealing the secret here, and then everything gets solved up. So let's imagine for a second she does, because she actually wants to have these Litecoins. So she reveals the secret here and actually takes the conditional transaction, the conditional payment. Then Bob does the same thing. And now the problem is, if this step doesn't happen, for some reason, so Bob never takes the money from Charlie, which is, if we are in this two-party scenario that you imagined, that you had on the slide before, which is where we said, okay, we have this option problem. Now, here the problem is, from the perspective of Charlie, he doesn't know who's at fault. Because either it could be that Bob wants to scam him and just doesn't reveal the secret, or what if Bob never got the secret from Alice? From the perspective of Charlie, there's no difference, because the next person for Charlie is Bob. He doesn't know, like in the case of onion routing, for example, he doesn't even know how many hops there are after Bob. Maybe Bob is the last person, maybe not. He doesn't know. So yeah, the question is, or the problem is, we cannot uniquely attribute fault in this case, and thereby we cannot introduce this punishment scheme that I talked about before. So yeah, maybe the Lightning guys can chime in afterwards. I would be very interested in if we can somehow solve this problem. And the last one is actually my personal favorite. How can we construct hash time lock contracts or conditional payments in general without knowing the recipient up front? What do I mean by this? Which variables do we need for a conditional payment or for a hash time lock contract? Well, we've got the redeem address, which is, in the case of a script, the pub key hash of whoever should be able to take the money in the success case. Then we have the pub key hash of whoever gets the money back when the timeout path is activated. Then we have the actual timeout and the hash. Now, the last three parts can actually be chosen by whoever constructs the conditional payment. But the redeem address needs to come from whoever wants to receive the money, because if they will, in the end, want to take the money, they will need to have the private key for it. So you cannot just choose it arbitrarily. Now, if we could somehow get rid of this step, this would actually mean we could get rid of a whole communication step between the two parties that want to do an atomic swap. Because you can then start out with, I just create a conditional payment based on this hash, I send it out there, and then somebody takes it, like uses the same hash and basically sends me an offer, hey, I would like to take this conditional payment that you had, so would you like sell me this secret? So you could build a whole market on selling secrets. It would be very easy to build a decentralized exchange based on top of that, if we could somehow figure out how to make a conditional payment that doesn't need a redeem address up front, but still guarantees that only one person could take it. Because if you just naively take out this pub key hash check in the first branch, then what the miners will do is, hey, there's free money. I just need to take the secret and somebody else will put into this redeem transaction and just forward it to myself. So it's not as simple as just taking out the variable. So yeah, with that, I want to conclude my talk. Thank you very much for listening.
Any questions?
Doesn't seem like it.
Yep. Have you thought about putting in a third party that kind of facilitates the atomic swap, so they wouldn't have control over the money, but they would be able to choose whether the swap takes place or not, and whether somebody gets punished or not? Obviously, it's not as ideal as not having any third party whatsoever, but considering they don't have full custody over the money, and we're talking about maybe small differences, maybe it's possible. Have you thought about that?
The problem with third parties, and it's actually similar to the channel problem, is if you have a third party, how do you handle the case where Alice and Bob, like if you say we have Charlie in the middle, how do you handle the case where Alice and Bob are the same person and trying to game the person who tries to act as the intermediary?
How would they? I mean, the intermediary has no control over the money, right? So what would you game? I mean,
but what do they do then?
So for example, maybe the adapter signature, you add in one more signature that needs to be provided by a third party, and that kind of initiates the actual swap. So the swap cannot take place unless the third party says it's okay, and maybe the third party has the ability to give the punishment fee from Alice to Bob, or from Bob to Alice, depending on who was not cooperating. I mean, we can talk about this more later if it's complicated.
Yeah,
Okay,
please.
great.
Hi, could you go back to the slide with open questions, just the short list?
My clicker doesn't work for some reason. No, does it?
Oh, here we go. Yeah, the next slide.
This one?
Yeah. So we can actually do script-to-script swaps across curves. There's a way to do this that I thought I had published somewhere, and then I was looking for a link and I couldn't find it.
Oh, cool.
But this one's solved.
Nice.
So there's a way that you can basically create a curve point on each curve, and you can prove that they have the same discrete logarithm in some sense, or that the bit decomposition of the discrete logarithm is the same. So then you can do like this, just transferring a shared secret thing, where you can do this extra proof that converts the secret from something that's meaningful on one curve to something that's meaningful on the other.
Awesome.
Yep, cool. I just wanted to say that.
Cool. Thanks.
So your solution to the free option problem was to add a punishment transaction in, essentially, right?
Yes.
That doesn't solve the problem. It just changes the EV of the option, right?
Well,
Alice still has the option to complete that trade, and if she does not, she pays a punishment. So Alice has posted a margin for this option, right?
yeah.
So she still has the option. She's just paid a small amount for it. Why did you decide to add a punishment transaction instead of adding in an atomic option premium at the start of the setup?
I'm not exactly sure how you what you have in mind with the how you design this premium in the beginning. But so the thing why we went for or are going for this solution is that it only punishes Alice in the case that she doesn't go through. So the only thing that we really care about is an incentive to just not even like make Alice not think about not going through with the whole thing. Like we don't want to build a market, or we don't want to build something that like incentivizes options. We just want to being able to punish Alice in the case that she abuses the whole system in order to do options instead of really doing the actual swap.
You can't actually remove optionality from the structure without script path expiry, which Bitcoin and Litecoin don't support. And in this case, because you're margining Alice in the currency that she has an option on, the margin is actually fairly ineffective, right? If Litecoin goes to 0, Alice doesn't suffer, kept the option, did not exercise it, and profited, right? So you need to margin Alice in Bitcoin, or you need to have Alice pay a Bitcoin premium at the start of the setup of the contract. There are constructions for doing this.
Yeah, I'll be happy to talk about it afterwards.
Hey, going back to the subject of this versus like Lightning atomic swaps, I think you made mention of channels later on in your presentation, but it wasn't abundantly clear to me. Like, what is the overhead of on-chain transactions for your model of atomic swaps versus, say, just doing them through Lightning channels? Because I couldn't tell how many additional on-chain transactions are required for the first model you mentioned.
Well, so for the on-chain version, it's still 4 transactions, because the one where Alice adds the collateral is just partially signed. So it's actually, there's only 4 transactions on the blockchain. The only thing that gets really different if you do it with channels is that this whole partially signing thing doesn't need to happen, because Bob and Alice already have a multi-signature that they can spend from. And so what you just do is, when you set up the conditional payment in the channel, you just change the outputs that in the faulty case, Alice just doesn't get back everything, but instead the state changes to so that Bob has more in the end.
So there would be 4 transactions on chain for the so it would be 2 per chain, or is it 4 per chain? Sorry.
Yeah, it's 2 per chain. Like first you lock up the money, and then both parties redeem.
But isn't that kind of inefficient compared to just doing it on Lightning, where we were just changing channel balances?
Well, it depends. Lightning at the moment, like you can run it on the Bitcoin network, and you can run it on the Litecoin network. And as soon as like those Bitcoin forks that you can run it on are too different from each other, you can actually do these atomic swaps that I think the Lightning Labs guys did, where just like the payment goes back on the different chain. The whole idea is not really about whether or not you want to do it on Lightning or on chain. It's about being able to do it wherever you want. So like the protocol that we are building is supposed to be a framework across all chains, where you can just decide in the beginning, or actually you just state what do you want to have, and then the protocol finds a way of, okay, if I swap Bitcoin for Litecoin and then for Ethereum, for Ether, then I can get my user whatever I want. And if Lightning is like a chain on the way that we can use, then we will use it. Otherwise, it just fall back to on-chain.
Thanks.
Okay, I'm afraid we don't have time for more questions.
It says 1 more minute. Okay.
Okay, we have 1 more minute, so if you can be quick.
So I understand you're building a protocol. I just wondered if you have any minimum requirements for chains, like certain chains that have centralized mining. You know, you couldn't really do an atomic swap because the chain could reorg after, say, 100 blocks or something. Do you have any ways to mitigate that?
Well, you actually can. It's basically, you have to think about it in the way, if the user wants to have like these permission coins, then they are risk that they like, they will have to take the risk that that the chain may change because it's permission. But from a technical point of view, the only thing you need are conditional payments. So if the chain can do conditional payments, it can do atomic swaps.
Okay, I'm just thinking, I'm not sure what protocol you're making, but say like a user wants to exchange Bitcoin for Monocoin in Japan, and and they exchange it, they think it's fine, and then maybe next day Monocoin, there's like a block withholding attack or something, and it's that their Monocoins well, it's gone. Oh,
Well, if the user wants to have it in the first place, he's hopefully aware of what the downsides of this blockchain are.
okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next up we have Ruben Somsen with Statechains off-chain transfer of UTXOs.
Perfect. Hello. I'm Ruben Somsen. I'm the education director of Reading Bitcoin that Warren Togami announced. I also run the Seoul Bitcoin meetup, awesome meetup in Seoul. If you're ever around, let me know. I'm going to be talking about Statechains and basically off-chain transfer of UTXO ownership. I think it's exciting. Hopefully you'll think it's exciting. So roughly what it achieves is it's another layer 2 scaling solution. You're avoiding on-chain transactions, so the usual, similar to Lightning, for example. The difference or advantage over Lightning is that the coin movement is not restricted. So you don't have these channels that you have to find a path and exactly send that amount. And there's actually some synergy with Lightning. So it's not a replacement for Lightning. It's rather something that can kind of work together with Lightning. It has some similarities to federated sidechains as well. However, the difference is that the federation doesn't actually have full control over the coins. So it's not like you're handing over the coins to a group and they can simply take it. But it is a little bit close to that. We'll get into that. You can think of it as kind of like a mix in terms of security, a mix between Lightning and federated sidechains, but maybe a little bit closer to the federated sidechains. And yeah, unique limitation. Unfortunately, you can only move a full UTXO, but that is also kind of intentional and that has some advantages as well. So what does this build on? Well, it builds on lots of things that are coming, hopefully, we'll see, to Bitcoin, Schnorr signatures, adapter signatures, L2, Graftroot. This is all thanks to the work of these people, Peter Wulle, Andrew Poelstra, Greg Maxwell, Lalu, and Christian Decker, and well, many others. It works on any cryptocurrency that supports these techniques, so it's not specific to Bitcoin only, but yeah, it requires kind of this to be in there. Graftroot is kind of optional, but still kind of nice to have. So the high-level overview is roughly what we're trying to achieve. This is not actually what we're doing, but what we're trying to achieve is what you could imagine as on-chain, having one Bitcoin and moving it from in a channel from it being locked up between A and B to it being locked up between A and C to it being locked up between A and D. But off-chain, right? So we're trying to change the ownership of a UTXO off-chain, and we want to guarantee the redemption. So we want the last person in this chain, in this case D, to actually be able to get the coins, right? C and D should not be relevant anymore. And so the facilitator, the person who helps you with this, or the group who helps you with this, is the state chain entity. So we're going to be calling that A in this presentation. And A can, so this is kind of the downside, A can theoretically collude with prior owners. So even though D is the owner, if A comes together with B or C and says like, hey, let's screw over D, they could. However, if A does that, this collusion or this cheating will be provable, and therefore it ruins the reputation of A, of the state chain entity. Okay, so let's kind of get into like how it actually works. So basically, you have Bob locking up a coin with the state chain entity A. However, if you just do this, right, if you just send this to the Bitcoin blockchain, who actually owns it? Well, that kind of depends on what the time lock transaction says, right? So you have some kind of time lock, either in the script or off-chain, depending on what kind of system you use. But if you have this off-chain transaction that goes from A, B to B, now basically that means Bob is the owner. And we're actually utilizing L2 here, so it's not it's not just a signature of B that's required, but it's a more complicated script, right? It's A, B, or B in 5 days. Yeah, so the question kind of is, well, can we just transfer this from Bob to Carol? Well, we kind of can, but it's not really great, right? We can just say like, well, we'll just change this off-chain transaction, give it to Carol. But now, you know, Carol still has no power over it. Bob can change his mind at any time together with Alice. And really, Carol just wants to send this on-chain right away to actually get the money. So rather, what we do is we introduce a so-called transitory key X. And this key is kind of what Bob locks up. His money, he locks it up with A, but he utilizes this key X. So he has key B and he has key X. And now, when we create this transaction, we actually pass on this transitory key from Bob to Carol. So now both Bob and Carol know the private key of X. So the role of the Statechain entity of A here is very important. They basically promise to only cooperate with the last owner. So if it goes from Bob to Carol, Carol's the last owner. Only Carol is the person that A will cooperate with. Important to note, here it's written down as just A, but it's actually, you can do a federation using Schnorr signatures. It can be like A1 plus A2 plus A3. So you can have an actual federation. You can make it like 8 out of 10, things like that. So even though we're talking about A as like a kind of a single key here, think of it as a federation. So what the federation does is they keep a state chain, or rather multiple state chains, listing every UTXO they control. That's important because you don't want there to be a duplicate history. So you need to know exactly which UTXOs the state chain claims to control. And every time a UTXO moves on the state chain, there needs to be a signature, right? When the money moves from Bob to Carol, the state chain entity needs to have a signature from Bob stating that that's what Bob wanted to do. So, visualized here, you see basically a Bitcoin on-chain transaction with an off-chain transaction where Bob can potentially redeem that Bitcoin. And on the state chain, we'll have a representation of that, where there's some key X that is under the control of the state chain entity, and Bob is the current owner according to the state chain. And when we transfer the money, we update both chains essentially. So we have the off-chain transaction for redeeming the Bitcoin. So Carol gets so Bob, basically on the state chain side, Bob signs a transaction saying, I want this money to go to Carol. And Carol receives the off-chain transaction that allows her to actually redeem it on-chain if she wants. So here we're utilizing L2. For those who don't know L2, what it means is that basically you can either string these transactions together, so you can publish that second transaction and then publish the third, or you can just go straight up to the third transaction and publish it right away. So basically we're, this is thanks to L2, you have a transaction cut through. But the problem here is obviously, well, who goes first, right? If we just give this to Carol, then now on the state chain, it looks like, like the state chain entity, like A has been cheating. It's just given the money to Carol on chain, but on the state chain side, there's no signature from Bob. So that's not good. Other way around, similar problem. Now it looks on the state chain as if Carol has received the money, but Carol cannot actually get the money because she has no signature there. So we utilize adapter signatures, scriptless scripts, and basically what we do is, scriptless scripts have been explained here before, but I have a nice visualization here. Basically, you give an incomplete signature to all the parties involved, and then as soon as one of the signatures gets completed, so in this case, on the state chain side, the state chain completes their signature, together with Bob and Carol's help. Once this signature hits, it's a public. So it's a public. The state chain is like a public ledger, right? So you can access it as soon as you see this publicized. That's the moment when Carol actually learns the full transaction on the Bitcoin side. So this happens atomically. So what's the security here? We already talked about it a little bit, but I want to be very clear. Moving coins always requires the permission of, well, the state chain entity, A, which we assume is going to be a federation, and somebody who has that transitory key, which is really anybody who previously owned that UTXO. However, the entity must cooperate with the last transitory key holder, and if they do not do so, there will be evidence of fraud. Because of the adapter signatures, we're guaranteeing that there's always a signature that the money was actually supposed to move. So worst case scenario, what could possibly go wrong? The state chain entity could obtain a bunch of these transitory keys, let's say it's XYZ or something. For whatever reason, he was able to get a bunch of them. And then he proceeds to steal them. He can steal the money, and this will be, the fraud will be provable, everybody can see it, everybody can prove it. And this will prompt everybody whose transitory key is not being compromised to withdraw on-chain. And they can do so because they have an on-chain, they have a valid transaction to send. Right? So basically, worst case scenario, as many transitory keys as can be obtained could potentially be stolen in the case that the entity is malicious. So what's interesting to note here, that even though that transitory key assumption is kind of weak, right? You can definitely, if you try hard, you can maybe get those keys. The state chain entity doesn't actually have control over the coins. So if they get hacked, that's not enough, right? You need to hack the state chain entity, and on top of that, you need to get a bunch of these transitory keys. And imagine there's some court order or something to freeze the coins or confiscate these coins. Well, the state chain entity cannot actually do that. They cannot help you with that because they don't have the full set of keys. So one of the downsides I mentioned, right, was the only being able to send the full UTXO. So, you know, what if I want to pay somebody? What if I have 2 Bitcoins and I want to send 1 Bitcoin? Well, you can swap. So imagine Carol here wanting to send 1 Bitcoin to somebody. What she'll have to do first is do a swap with some person who has 2 times 1 Bitcoin. So it's as simple as this. You just swap. This is all atomic. You can do this with adapter signatures. And now Carol has 2 times 1 Bitcoin and can send one of them to whoever she's paying. Possible with other coins too. So if you want to trade 2 Bitcoins for 200 Litecoin, that's same process. So one of the problems here is that anything that's smaller than kind of an economically viable UTXO cannot be transferred, right? I mean, I can make a tiny UTXO and then send it through the state chain to somebody. But then if they ever want to redeem it on chain, they're going to receive nothing because potentially the fees are too high, right? So there's some kind of limit that is related to the actual fees. If the state chain entity wants to charge some fees, then that's a big problem. And if you wanted to swap between multiple currencies, like we showed earlier, like 200 Litecoin is not equal to 2 Bitcoin. So what are you going to do? So ideally, we want to solve this without adding some kind of trust to the system, right? Because the nice thing here is that the state chain entity has no control over any coins whatsoever. So obviously, we can just say like, well, yeah, we'll trust them for like small amounts and just do it like that. But ideally, we want nothing like that. We want the state chain entity to have no direct control over coins. So what we can actually do, and this is where it gets interesting, is we can create a lightning channel on top of a state chain. So what we can do here is we can send it, instead of sending it from B to C, we can actually send it to BC. And now, on both the state chain and with the off-chain Bitcoin transaction, there's a channel. There's a channel between B and C. And the channel, the creation process will be the other way around. You would actually create the lightning transaction before you create the state chain transaction. But you now have a lightning channel on top of a state chain. And this has some very interesting properties. Basically, the first thing is you can update your lightning channel together with swapping these UTXOs on the state chains. you can have basically anything that you can send over the state chain, you don't need Lightning for. So really, the only thing you're using Lightning for here, in this case, if you're willing to trust the state chain entity, you can you're really only sending those amounts that are not economically viable. In the uncooperative case, so let's say for some reason you have to close your Lightning channel, it's actually exactly the same cost as L2, same number of transactions. And so what's interesting here is that basically, what was it called? Splicing in and splicing out is all off-chain here. You can very easily close channels, reopen channels, add coins to channels. It's no problem because it's already off-chain. So what are some potential use cases? Well, this is, obviously you can send a Bitcoin to somebody or half a Bitcoin or whatever. So just off-chain value transfer. You could utilize this as a platform between Lightning and the Bitcoin blockchain and have an easy way to create, open, close, add channels, splicing in, splicing out. This also facilitates the use case of betting. This might be less obvious, but if you want to do a bet, if you want to do it on Lightning, it's kind of problematic actually. You can kind of do it, but it requires either the entire channel or the entire, like the hops you're going through to have the money locked up throughout the bet, or you have to kind of put another channel on top of an existing channel, and it gets kind of messy. So really, you'd rather not do that. You'd rather create a new channel with the person you're betting with. And normally, well, you'd have to do that on-chain, but now you can utilize Statechains for that. So it's great for these kind of betting channels. So it has great synergy with stuff like discrete lock contracts, or just a regular multi-sig bet, whatever type you prefer. And here's another interesting one. So because we have these, on the state chain, these UTXOs don't actually move on-chain. What that means is that if there's some kind of fork, those coins are still inside of that UTXO. So even if you're moving that UTXO from person to person to person, you're literally moving every potential fork that happened during that time simultaneously. And what we can do with Graftroot is kind of allow an easy way to actually get out. So let's say you want to now redeem these coins, right? You want to get out of the state chain and into the Bitcoin blockchain, and maybe there was some, Bitcoin Silver hard fork or something in the meantime. Assuming we have Graftroot, the state chain entity can give a Graftroot signature to the final owner of the UTXO when they want to get out, and utilizing the Graftroot signature, they can then go on and, if there's some replay protection or something, they can create the necessary signatures to withdraw from any chain they like. So for something like an ETF, where we have the problem of, well, who's going to decide which coins are going to be honored when there's a hard fork, you can kind of honor them all if you wanted to do it like this. And the same goes for exchanges, but they might be less interested in a system like this. I'm not entirely certain. So I have more time than I thought, so that's great. So I'll go slow here. So currently the system is interactive. So if you want to send money from Bob to Carol, Carol needs to also provide a signature. So there might be a way to make it non-interactive, but there's some trade-offs involved there. So these are kind of topics that require more thinking. Yeah, this is interesting. So we talked about this transitory key, right? And we're sending it from Bob to Carol to Dave to Eve. And all these people touch this transitory key, which is not ideal. So we can actually insert a hardware security module here and transfer the key through this hardware security module. And as long as the hardware security module is secure, which I think is a big assumption, by the way. I mean, we've had SGX being hacked and things like that. So, maybe more for future purposes. But then there's literally no way the state chain entity can cheat. Because as soon as the transitory key moves, it gets deleted. Like if Bob moves to Carol, Bob's copy of that transitory key gets deleted on the hardware. And since you always have this redemption transaction that you can send to the Bitcoin blockchain, you don't have to store that on the hardware. So even if the hardware fails, if it breaks, if you throw it away or whatever, you still have access to those Bitcoins because you're storing that Bitcoin transaction that you can send to the Bitcoin blockchain to get out of the state chain at any time. Yeah, so graph withdrawal, yeah, I kind of talked about this already. Yep. Yeah, so what you have to do as if you have a certain UTXO, so the interesting thing here is that every UTXO has its own history because the coin only moves in a straight line. You're never splitting them up. At least from the view of the state chain entity itself, it only sees the coins moving from person A to person B to person C. Even if you have some kind of lightning channel there, since we're using Shigenori, it just looks like a single signature, so they don't even know that some kind of like lightning channels is there at all. So there might be some ways to kind of, if you control a UTXO, you have to keep track of that history specifically. You have to know that everything that happened to that specific UTXO that you're owning, that nothing funky is going on there because that's your money, right? So everybody's responsible for their own UTXOs, keeping track of the station entity, seeing if they're not cheating. And there might be, there's for further research, there might be some ways to do that in a way that's not, doesn't require actually getting the entire history, or maybe you can summarize the history somehow. So that's for further research. And, oh yeah, this is another interesting one. We can make it so that the state chain entity doesn't actually know what they're signing. So if we utilize blind signatures, then basically we can make it so that you're locking up money with the state chain entity with transitory key X. And even though you're doing that, the state chain entity doesn't need to be aware of what coins they own. And they just blindly sign whatever you tell them to sign. So Bob goes to the state chain entity, says, sign this message for me, please. And what they're actually signing is this off-chain L2 style transaction that allows them to redeem the money. So maybe the state chain entity helps you to send the money to Carol, but the state chain entity is not actually aware that they're doing that. They're just signing a blind signature. And then it goes from Carol to Dave to Eve. And what every participant needs to do when they receive the money is actually verify all these blind signatures to make sure. So the state chain entity, it publishes the blind signatures. So it says like, these are the signatures I made so far, and that is kind of the trust there that they didn't make any signatures other than those. And if they did make other signatures, then they're obviously cheating. And every time somebody receives the money, they have to unblind those signatures for themselves to verify whether or not the correct thing was signed. And you don't actually accept the money if that's not true. Yeah, so the paper is right here, Google URL. Maybe take a screenshot if you want it, or you can check the live stream later. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Okay, we have a few minutes for questions.
Is this clock correct? It says I have 7.5 minutes.
7 minutes.
Okay.
So you heard that I like layers on top of layers. Thank you.
No problem.
Could you? So I see a lot of similarities with Lightning channel factories. So they both have kind of like active security, and so could you kind of just compare and contrast what the differences are?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so basically with Lightning channel factories, it's kind of similar in the sense that you're creating channels off-chain. But anytime you want to recreate a channel, every participant in the factory needs to put their signature on it. So, if you have a channel with 10 people and you want to change the composition, well, first of all, you're limited to the coins inside of that factory. Second, yeah, you can't. Every participant has to be online and has to agree to changing that state. So what we're doing here is obviously we're adding another security assumption, because with Lightning channel factories, really you have no, it's all, you can always just send it to the Bitcoin blockchain. You're guaranteed to get it. So if you accept the additional security assumptions here, you're not limited to this group. and you don't need a bunch of people to sign. You only need the Statechain entity to sign, and the current owner.
And also, could you talk about the benefits that it has over federated sidechains like Liquid?
Well, yeah, well, it's different. Like in certain ways, because you have to send entire UTXOs. That's kind of worse. But the benefit is mainly that with the federated sidechain, the people who run the federated sidechain still own the coins. So if you want to put legal pressure on them, or if you want to hack them, you're very directly getting the money. So that's one difference here. And I think it's very nice. You have this, you always have the option to get out of the state chain without the permission of the state chain entity. And that's also different with federated sidechains.
Okay, thank you.
So hi. Yeah.
Yeah, hey.
So particularly with the limitation that the UTXO needs to be transferred wholly, I'm curious about the defenses to denial of service, like the way current chains work is by charging fees as a rate limiter. So do you have thoughts about this?
Yeah, so one of the things you could do is you could open up a, so that's definitely kind of, I think, a weakness, the fact that you have this kind of limit of how, you have to send the entire UTXO. And that's, I think, where the synergy with Lightning comes in, where you could open up a channel with the state chain entity, and through that Lightning channel, allow micropayments for every time you want to update the state. So that's roughly what I have in mind currently. I prefer that over, I guess you could like pay them up front or something and then get like 100 transactions worth. But I really like the fact here that the state chain entity has no control over the money whatsoever. So yeah, my preference goes to Lightning there.
Great presentation. Like really, I've been thinking about a lot of this stuff, and it's great to see it so fleshed out.
Thanks.
Are there any different assumptions about security other than relative to existing payment channels or Lightning that a miner could attack this system, essentially like a zero transaction, empty block DOS that miners could do, or censoring like retribution stuff?
Well, in one sense, I mean, I'm thinking about this now, but if the state chain entity doesn't go malicious, there's actually no risk. Well, I guess there's one risk, which is that some prior owner could send their state to the blockchain, and then that forces you to kind of like react to it. Yeah, I'd say at the very least, at the worst case, it's similar to the problems that L2 has, which are already significantly less than the current system we have in Lightning. Considering you can always dynamically change the fees, so even if fees go up, you can easily add or subtract fees where needed. So no, it's definitely not worse. Maybe slightly better, but I'd have to think about it more to be absolutely certain. Great.
Any more questions? Okay, in that case, thank you, Ruben.
All right, thank you.
All right, next up we have Niji, Bitcoin bridge utilizing payment channels.
Hello everyone, I'm Hiroki Watanabe, a research engineer at NTT. Today, I'm going to talk to you about a new cross-chain way of connecting Bitcoin and other private blockchains. My colleagues and I call the protocol Niji, which means rainbow in Japanese. Kaizen, rainbow, Kaizen, Niji. So we may like Japanese words in title. Okay, at end of the presentation, I would like to do a short demo with Niji protocol. Okay, let's start. Okay, as you all know, Bitcoin has inspired various blockchain projects. It says that on average, nearly 9,000 projects per year are started through GitHub. Furthermore, the development of private blockchain is accelerating. Companies, governments, and research communities are all trying to utilize blockchains. To avoid privacy and scalability problems, each private chain is independent and closed within its organization. It's like a system of isolated blockchain planets. Various use cases other than currencies, such as supply chains, energy trading, and asset exchanges have been proposed. But we will have to say that there is a still long distance before we connect these planets. Although a method of cooperation among blockchains has been sought, none has been fully established yet. In this presentation, what I would like to focus on is payment collaboration between blockchains, especially Bitcoin and consortium chain. A consortium chain is a private blockchain that is controlled by pre-selected set of nodes, also known as permissioned blockchain. A consortium blockchain basically lacks a means of payment. Ironically, the consortium chain does not have any tokens. Its token has no market value and cannot be used for payment. Of course, several solutions have been presented to enable payments to be made. One is ICO. ICO is crowdfunding using cryptocurrencies. However, many organizations do not prefer this means because they fear excessive money games or government regulations. What they would prefer is a way to cooperate, say, with banks and other third parties. However, I think that such a method is not a good one in the long term because the authority is concentrated in a specific node like a bank. It would be better to have a cooler technical solution. If you use an inter-blockchain that intermediates between a blockchain and another blockchain, it will surely guarantee settlements in a decentralized manner. Also, in a more instant way, I think that you can exchange tokens directly by using common protocol like atomic swaps. However, here, I would like to show you some problems with these ideas. Most of the existing methods are based on transfer of value, token transfer. That is transferring Bitcoin's value to a token issued by consortium. So customers use the tokens to pay for services, some services deployed on the consortium chain. For example, they could use the tokens to purchase some assets, insurance, and exchange energy and digital content, etc. These services are deployed as distributed application using smart contracts. However, these tokens can be subject to attack. This is problem even in the consortium chain. The more valuable the coin, the more it will motivate malicious persons to engage in attacks and fraud. organizations operating the consortium will suffer from security fatigue. Especially for small organizations, it's difficult to have strong security. It's very, very difficult to have strong security. This is an obstacle to introducing a blockchain system. So let me show you the goal my colleagues and I set out to achieve. It is to allow you to use the value of Bitcoin directly in the consortium chain. Customers can pay in Bitcoin on the consortium chain in an atomic and secure manner. This also makes it possible to remove intermediate tokens completely from the consortium chain. The consortium does not need to have any variable tokens. This allows service providers to concentrate only on their service operations, service provisions, without worrying about the token security. So how can we achieve this in a decentralized manner? Core idea. Our core idea is to use the payment channel. The payment channel has already been mentioned many times in this conference, and it's one of the techniques to make a speedy payment on an off-chain network. First, open the channel to the participant who wants to make payments with each other. This is achieved by depositing to the Marushiko account. Next, transactions occur on the off-chain network among with participants. You can negotiate the balance many times within the range of Marushiko funds. Finally, to make a settlement, either participant closes the channel. Normally, all off-chain transactions occur other networks different from Bitcoin. So, different from Bitcoin network. It's like a Lightning network. This is normal use. Now, our proposal is a bit different. Our proposal is to build Bitcoin payment channel on the consortium chain. It means to process off-chain transactions on the consortium chain. Specifically, our idea is to invoke some function of smart contracts by passing an off-chain of Bitcoin transactions, passing an off Bitcoin transaction. Let's look at the situation a bit more concretely. The payment channel consists of 3 types of transactions: funding, updates, and settlements. The update transaction, also known as a commitment transaction in the Lightning Network, is an incomplete transaction with only the signature of either participants. In this figure, you can see there is only Alice's signatures, right? In the off-chain network, we use the update transaction as a proof of payment. Funding and settlements transactions are submitted to the Bitcoin network, while the middle update transaction is submitted to the consortium chain network in our method. A smart contract on the consortium chain receives the update transaction as input data. Here is the code of the contract. The value of the update transaction is validated, and its signature is also verified. Finally, if all of them, verification and validation, all of them are OK, the service function is invoked. I would like to sum up the main points so far. In our setting, we suppose cooperation between public Bitcoin and Turing-complete consortium chain. The assumed users are service provider and customers. The service provider receives payments and provides some services. The customer pays Bitcoins to the service provider via the consortium chain. and use the service on the basis of smart contract. Our goal is to build a Bitcoin payment channel with a smart contract on the consortium chain. The process from payment to service provision is autonomously, performed autonomously without interaction between the parties. In other words, this means ensuring the atomicity of the transaction. In addition, no modification of the Bitcoin protocol is required. In order to achieve this, we had two major challenges. The first was that we needed to design a new channel, new payment channel. With this new channel, customers can update payments non-interactively with service providers. Customers service provider can also cancel payments using the same channel. The other challenge is on the consortium side was to reduce computational cost of the Niji protocol. The consortium chain uses EVM, the Ethereum virtual machine, as a runtime environment for smart contracts. The computational cost in the code that is gas. Gas is severely restricted because EVM safely executes the apps in the decentralized network. Now, I'll explain the first challenge. The thing we want to do is to perform all operations from payment to service execution as one transaction, only one transaction. This means that the channel must be non-interactive. Specifically, the payment is completed without interaction with the service provider. Payment verification is done only within the contract code of the consortium chain, and the service provider itself does not participate in the verification. So that needs for a non-interactive channel. Of course, we first considered using existing channels. There are two types. One is unidirectional channel, like the Spillman style one, in which money can be sent from Alice to Bob, but not in the opposite direction. Alice can update the payment amount unilaterally without interacting with Bob. So it's a non-interactive channel. The other is a bidirectional channel, as represented by Lightning Network channel. So this sort of channel can send money from Alice to Bob and can also return money from Bob to Alice. Updates are done interactively, so mutual agreement is required for renewal of payment. We can notice that the features of these channels are exclusive of each other. But what we propose is the same bidirectional channel as a new solution that incorporates these features. Our solution is a same bidirectional channel. The same bidirectional channel behaves differently depending on the direction by direction. Most of the payments are supposed to be in the direction from the customer to the service provider. This means we can make a payment non-interactively. So setting a time lock-based script for the funding transaction achieves an effort similar to that of the Spillman style channel. On the other hand, we also have a payment direction from the service provider to the customers. So this direction only rarely occurs. So that only rarely occurs. For example, in the case of payment cancellation, in this case, we'll restrict the spending of the transaction by using hash lock time contract. In other words, you need an interactive agreement in case of cancellation. A penalty is given if a service provider abandons the agreement, this agreement. This is similar to what happened in the Lightning Network. All features of both directions are implemented in the payment in the applet transaction, and it's not necessary to modify the existing Bitcoin protocol. The thing to note here is that time lock time. Time lock time T1 should be greater than T2 to secure the channel. This also helps to lower the cost of monitoring the channel. For more detail, take a look at our white paper. It's supposed to be published after this conference. The next challenge is to reduce the computational costs at contract execution. We use the Ethereum virtual machine as a runtime environment for the consortium chain smart contract. EVM is one of the most popular execution environments for not only public blockchain, but enterprise blockchains. Many engineers have used EVM-based platforms and have experimented with launching a private chain. EVM security is supposed by the gas mechanism. Gas is equal to the computational cost to perform a smart contract. The point is that an upper limit of gas is set for each block. This prevents overloading of data and defends the network against DDoS attack with infinite loops, like infinite loops. Ethereum's mainnet is currently limited to 8 million gas. Of course, in the private blockchain, it's possible to control the gas limit. However, it's important to mention that you should set an upper limit for several reasons, such as to save storage space and to keep a network healthy. Naturally, gas costs occur even in our protocol. The issue is its cost. Its cost is too high for EVM to work as a platform, as a payment channel. So we did two things to save gas. The first is templatize the applet transactions and register them in the smart contract beforehand. Customers need only submit information differences, which makes the computational processing lighter. As for this, I'll explain what happens in the Niji protocol. When opening the channel, the service provider registers the template of the applet transaction with the smart contract on the consortium chain beforehand. A template is an incomplete one without remittance amount and signature value filled in. Also, the customer registers the deposit information, including his Bitcoin's public key that is used for verification. With the registered templates, the customer just has submit only difference information. Finally, the service provider takes the last state of the applet transaction from the consortium chain and make a settlement transaction to close the channel. Second thing is to efficiently perform cryptographic operations within the contract code. For the Niji protocol, the contract code must verify the Bitcoin signature on the EVM. Its gas consumption is too high to implement its native OP codes. Now, just remember that the same elliptic curve parameter is used in Bitcoin and Ethereum's signature, ECDSA. So you can use the pre-compiled contracts, which special function to perform Ethereum's cryptographic operations by using less gas. To take advantage of that, we convert some Bitcoin signature-related formats into Ethereum formats. For instance, making the virtual Ether address from the Bitcoin secret key. Through such efforts, we confirmed that our contract operations actually fall below the 8 million gas limit of the mainnet. When using the consortium chain with the Ethereum POA algorithm, we confirmed that payment has a latency of around 2 seconds. Okay, anyway, now I would like to short demo. Let's move on. Okay. In this demo, I show you how the video streaming services, its service provider receives payment with the Niji protocol. First, open the site and connect to the consortium blockchain network using browser extension, MetaMask. That is a wallet for Ethereum blockchain. It's connected to the private network that is operated by consortium. Then we can sign in and get started. This is done with the MetaMask authentication function. Here is our address. So for the consortium chain. Also, you can see the list of content you cannot purchase yet. First of all, we'll need to create a deposit address. So we open the payment channel. Get Bitcoins public key via Niji's daemon tool and submit it to the site to get the address. Okay, here is magic data. Now we deposit 0.003 BTC into the address. The transaction has been sent to the Bitcoin testnet. Let's check the transaction at the Bitcoin Explorer. This is a testnet, just testnet. Just a second. Here it is. Next, we need to register deposit information on the consortium chain. Use MetaMask to record all the information needed to open the channel on the smart contract. At the moment, the channel has this data is submitted to the consortium chain. Okay, at the moment, our address is not activated yet. So so the old system configuration of the demo is here. Now we have completed deposits. Well, the funding transaction has been registered in the Bitcoin blockchain, but our channel is not activated yet. The service provider needs to activate our channel. For explanation, I achieve this manually in this demo. In the activation process, the service provider creates a template for the upgrade transaction and registers it into the smart contract on the consortium chain. Okay, we got the go ahead. Now we can purchase contents. Let's purchase one. Which one? Okay, quick. So, in this process, the customer's signature is submitted to the smart contract to update state of payment channel. You can check the channel state, the state of channel here. You can check the state of channel here. And now we can purchase. You can check watch the content. Of course, payment can be done in a row. You can purchase. For another content like this. At this time, the smart contract holds IDs of the contents purchased by a customer. This data can be shared among consortium members via consortium chain, like this. Now, let's consider collaboration with the review site in consortium. This review site is operated by another organization. As before, let's sign in the MetaMask with MetaMask. You can, as you can see, review site is posted on the article. You can see that there is a smart secret content in the article. It includes spoiler content, so you can see spoiler alert. Now, suppose you purchase content at the video streaming site, Big Buck Bunny. Then the record you purchase the content is shared safely on the consortium chain. Now, it should be possible to read the article. Okay, just a second. So you can now check the special content like this. In this process, the service provider gets the last update transaction. And finally, at the end of the demo, the settlement must be done. In this process, the service provider gets the last update transaction from the smart contract and then broadcasts it to the Bitcoin network. Okay, the settlement transaction has been broadcasted to the Bitcoin test network. You can check the Bitcoin Explorer. Okay, now the demo is finished. Okay, the last slide. Finally, let me mention what we plan for the future. The current implementation is still a non-SegWit version. To improve security and extensibility, we need to make it support SegWit. We also would like to consider various extensions combined with other protocols. That finishes my presentation. Thank you for your attention. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hiroki. We have about 3 minutes for questions.
Thank you for your talk. I was wondering, how does the consortium chain verify the Bitcoin blockchain? Because, how are you sure that the UTXO that they're giving you is actually a valid UTXO on the blockchain?
Yes. The Bitcoin's signature is verified in the EVM. So, but the cost of verification is too high to work at a platform of payment channel. We did the signatures converting. So the Bitcoins and Ethereum signature use same elliptic curve in ECDSA. This signature is compatible.
Okay. I'm not talking about signatures. I'm talking about the proof of work of Bitcoin. If you don't know whether this is a valid UTXO, how do you know that the channel, the Lightning channel that they opened with you, how do you know that that's a valid channel if you can't verify all of the UTXOs before it? And at least the proof of work if you're going to do some sort of SPV Lightning implementation. So are you just relying on a full Bitcoin node in the background with some sort of like LND in the background that you're going to use as... So I don't understand how the EVM, how the smart contract is understanding that the Bitcoin network has a valid transaction that is... I think that's like one of the central parts of what you are trying to say, but I don't think it was relayed clearly. How does the smart contract understand that the Lightning transaction on the Bitcoin network is a valid transaction on the Bitcoin network?
Yes, the customer through the transaction for consortium chain. And the transaction is verified by miners in consortium chain. The miners are authorities of consortium. So this is a consortium chain is verification process.
So the consortium chain verifies the Bitcoin transaction by verifying the proof of work of the Bitcoin chain, and then they also sign it, or I'm not following, I'm sorry.
It depends on the consortium chain. So that by proof of work, also the proof of authority, and many algorithms, there are many algorithms to verify the block in consortium chain.
Okay, Okay, thank you.
That's all we have time for. Thank you, Hiroki. And the final talk of this session is interoperability with cryptocurrency-backed tokens.
Okay, hi, my name is Alexei, and this is a talk together with Dominik, and this is joint work with other researchers at the Imperial College Center for Cryptocurrency Research and Engineering. So, as with the last talk, we'll try to keep it not as in-depth technical. We have a preprint available online where we go into the protocol details and so on. And we'll talk about interoperability with cryptocurrency-backed tokens. Now, the motivation behind this talk is pretty straightforward, right? We have over 2,000 cryptocurrencies, and most of them differ in design and purpose. And the goal what we're trying to achieve is we want to have secure and decentralized cross-chain communication. Now, I think we can all agree to some extent that we have had a history of theft and loss in Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, mostly related to centralized providers. Now, recently, as a counter-movement to centralized exchanges, we've seen decentralized exchanges appear, where you do not have to trust the central operator. Now, this is a super cool development. However, they currently only account for less than 1% of their overall market volume of trades. And a potential reason for this is that they're mostly limited to ERC20 tokens on Ethereum, that is, native assets to the Ethereum blockchain. So, with a few exceptions, there is no real cross-chain trading going on. Now, atomic swaps have been introduced today multiple times, and we'll briefly skip over this slide because I guess everyone by now knows how they work. But let's briefly point out the disadvantages that we've seen. With atomic swaps in their base form, there are maybe other implementations which fix these things, but in the base form, the users need to be online, right? Both parties need to interact with each other. And furthermore, we need an out-of-band channel to exchange the revocation transactions. This also requires us to monitor both chains we're interacting with, because I need to know if something has gone wrong, because I need to know whether I need to publish the revocation transaction or not. And the thing is, we do not really have a standardized interface for hash time lock contracts. So they may differ even in Bitcoin and also across different cryptocurrencies. And the thing is, I as a client need to be able to read and understand these hash time lock contracts. So this is kind of a challenge for developers. And we've also heard that atomic swaps are vulnerable to race conditions, you can do mempool sniffing, and so on. So the idea of cryptocurrency-backed tokens is actually pretty simple. What we want to do is we want to issue tokens that are one-to-one backed by an existing cryptocurrency. And in the rest of this talk, we'll use Bitcoin and Ethereum as an example, although the scheme we introduce here is more generic and can support more cryptocurrency pairs in general. Now, what we actually want to do, we want to issue tokens, right? So what we do, we lock Bitcoin on the Bitcoin blockchain, and then we unlock the corresponding amount of tokens on the Ethereum chain. Now, we want to make sure that these tokens are divisible and fungible, because I want to trade them. And furthermore, when I trade a token to Dominik, for example, he wants to be sure that I cannot spend the corresponding units of Bitcoin on the Bitcoin chain, right? Because then his token is worthless. So we need transfer atomicity. Furthermore, what we also need is we need to maintain consistency between Bitcoin and the Ethereum chain. So we need to make sure that the amount of Bitcoin and Bitcoin tokens is the same. So the lock Bitcoin and the Bitcoin tokens that we issued. Now, when we finally decide to redeem these tokens back to Bitcoin, we need to destroy them. And when we do this, we need to guarantee value redeemability. That means I must have a guarantee that it will get the Bitcoins back, or the equivalent value, and we'll come to this later in the presentation. Now, the challenge that we face in Bitcoin is that we cannot really have conditional locks based on external information, right? So I would only want to release the Bitcoin that I've locked if the corresponding Ethereum tokens have been destroyed, but I can't really verify that. So the question that you would ask, well, why don't we use hash time lock contracts? The challenge here is, however, that I cannot really generate a secret on a public blockchain by a publicly verifiable smart contract without everyone knowing about the secret, which would then essentially allow everyone to take the Bitcoin on the Bitcoin chain. So we do need some sort of intermediary on Bitcoin at the moment. However, we want to make sure that this intermediary is trustless and incentivized to behave honestly. So let's briefly skip over the architecture we have in the roles. So we have a creator who locks coins and issues tokens. We have the redeemer who burns tokens and gets back the coins. We have senders and receivers of tokens. And then, as already mentioned, we have the issuer. And the issuer is a non-trusted and collateralized party that is responsible to make sure that the redemption and the issuing process on Bitcoin happens correctly. We also have another intermediary on the Ethereum chain, which is a public smart contract. I mean, the contracts are not smart. They basically just do what you tell them. But this contract is publicly verifiable and it handles the trading and the issuing and the redeeming on the Ethereum chain. Now, how do we achieve that the issuer is trustless? And for this, we use, as I guess the question was previously asked for the other talk, we use a light client on Ethereum that is capable of verifying Bitcoin's proof of work and also verifying Bitcoin transaction inclusion proofs. So in fact, there is an implementation for this on Ethereum for Bitcoin called BTC Relay. There are a few challenges we will talk about at the end of the talk with chain relays in general. But yeah, let's skip that for now. And we also want to make sure that the issuer is incentivized to behave honestly. So we need to be able to lock collateral and release it conditionally in the treasury contract. And finally, we have one optional requirement, and that is that the chain relay contract can verify hash-time lock contracts. But again, this is optional. Now, if we look at the requirements, we've talked about what we need in the treasury contract. So we need smart contracts, essentially. So on the issuing side, we need a blockchain like Ethereum. On the other side, however, on the backing side, we don't make strict requirements at all. We just need to be able to make payments, and optionally, we could use hash-time lock contracts as well. So the issuing side can be Ethereum, for example, and the backing chain can be Bitcoin, Ethereum Classic, and in principle also Litecoin. Now, before we go into the details about the protocols, let's talk about the improvements and advantages we can achieve by these schemes. So the protocols that we introduced, they're non-interactive. And at any given point in time, only one party has to be online, because the logic of the whole protocol is handled on-chain. Furthermore, we don't really need this censorship-resistant out-of-bound channel, because again, we handle most of the logic on an Ethereum contract that is visible to all participants. And also, since we use a chain relay, users don't necessarily have to monitor Bitcoin the whole time because they can trust that the SPV, if they trust the light client on Ethereum, they can be sure that proofs of correctness or fraud proofs will be provided. And finally, tokens allow us to have a standardized interface for different cryptocurrencies. So I can trade Bitcoin and Litecoin tokens without necessarily caring of how the implementation is handled below. Yeah. We'll skip the last point, but what is really important is that these tokens can be traded on decentralized exchanges today, which would essentially allow true cross-chain trades. Now, if we start to talk about the protocols, so what we want to do is we want to make sure that the issuer at first locks collateral. Now, this collateral on Ethereum defines how many tokens, how many Bitcoin-backed tokens the issuer indeed can create. So, for example, we would require over-collateralization to mitigate exchange rate fluctuations between the two cryptocurrencies. So let's say we require double as much collateral in value. So the issuer would do that, would lock up the collateral, and Alice would verify that this indeed happened. Because the contract is publicly visible, she can check that there is sufficient collateral available. Then she transfers Bitcoin to the issuer. And as soon as the security confirmation period is passed, she proves to the chain relay on Ethereum that she indeed has made this transaction. The chain relay will verify that the transaction has been included and make a callback to the treasury contract, which will in the same process automatically issue the tokens to Alice. And as we can see, the issuer is not active in this protocol. He does not have to be online at the moment. Now, of course, what is important is that Alice does not transfer the tokens to the issuer if there's not sufficient collateral available, because otherwise the issuer is not incentivized to behave honestly. However, you can think of race conditions in this case, because what happens if Alice and Carol both want to issue tokens at the same time? And the loser of this race will essentially lose Bitcoin because the issuer doesn't, well, he's not going to return them, right? He doesn't really care because he's not punished. And furthermore, the issuer could try to withdraw the tokens, the collateral on Ethereum before Alice is capable of finalizing the process. And this can be due to the security confirmation periods, latency on Ethereum. Alice can go offline for whatever reason. And therefore, we have three mitigations which we propose. So the first one is quite straightforward. Before the issuer can withdraw his Ethereum collateral, which is unused at the moment, he must declare that he wants to do so. So he must announce it. And then the contract will give the user sufficient time to finalize the pending issuing processes. And also at from this moment on, users know that it is no longer safe to make issue requests because the issuer will soon withdraw the collateral, and there may be race conditions. Now this is quite simple. This is nice because this more or less mitigates the issue that the issuer tries to withdraw collateral before the user can finalize the issue request. However, we still have the challenge that two users try to issue at the same time. And for this, we can use collateralized commitments. So again, this is a pretty simple scheme, and what Alice will do, before sending Bitcoin directly to the issuer, she will announce that she's doing this. So she will make a commitment to issue on the Ethereum blockchain in the contract. And this temporarily locks the corresponding amount of the issuer's collateral. However, of course, if we do not require any collateral from Alice as well, she could just go in and denial of service the whole contract, because she could continuously create issue requests without ever actually fulfilling them. So this is why Alice must also provide some small amount of collateral, which is then released once she issues the tokens. Now, of course, this kind of imposes some difficulties for users, because they now have to provide Ethereum collateral. So an alternative approach would be to use hash time lock contracts. And here, we kind of shift the responsibility from the user to the issuer. That is, instead of sending tokens directly to the issuer, Alice creates a hash time lock contract with a secret S, and then she proves again to the chain relay this transaction has been included in the Bitcoin blockchain. The chain relay verifies it, but now it will wait before issuing the tokens, because now Alice has to reveal the secret that she used in the hash time lock contract, and she will only do this if she's sure that sufficient collateral is available at this moment. Now, the thing here is, this is why we have this optional requirement of verifying HTLCs in the treasury contract, because the issuer must have sufficient time to withdraw from the HTLC output. Otherwise, Alice could basically double spend, right? So this is why we need this requirement, and the hash time lock contract must ensure that there's sufficient time. So what we would be doing from the implementation side, we have a template which the contract kind of gives to the users, and they just insert the parameters. Now, the trade protocol then is actually very simple. It's a simple ERC20 transfer.
All right, so we have issued our tokens, and now we can send them forth and back. We're using ERC20 for the moment. There's a couple of other Ethereum standards for tokens, but just for simplicity, we stick for ERC20 for now. But so let's say I'm Bob, and I just received those Bitcoin-backed tokens, and now I actually want to go back to the Bitcoin chain, which was the whole purpose of this, that we can do actually cross-chain. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to lock my Bitcoin-backed tokens in our treasury contract on Ethereum. And then our issuer must become active. So the issuer listens for this event that, well, I just locked those Bitcoin-backed tokens, and I actually want to have Bitcoin now. So when the issuer observes this event, the issuer goes ahead and sends the Bitcoins back to the address that I indicated when I sent this locking transaction. Upon this, the issuer will then start to send a proof to our BTC relay, and the BTC relay forwards this inclusion proof that, well, in fact, the issuer has issued Bitcoin back to the correct address, and our treasury contract will then release back the collateral that the issuer had to provide initially. Our issuer might actually do some misbehavior. So the issuer might actually be incentivized to just issue Bitcoin to himself, or might issue Bitcoin to somebody else, or just withhold it. In that case, we're going to slash the issuer's collateral, and this is where it's really important that we have an over-collateralization. And essentially, there's a mitigation process in place that then Bob can issue if he realizes that the issuer has actually been cheated. And here we also come to the point where, well, we talked about value redeemability. Since we kind of lost the Bitcoin at this point, we can only redeem Ethereum back to Bob, which might be one of the shortcomings of the current protocol. So to not only talk about in abstract terms about the protocol, we built an implementation to understand how our protocol actually works based on Bitcoin and Ethereum. So our first and trustless implementation basically uses here the issuer, which is collateralized, and then we have regular Bitcoin transactions, and we have a treasury contract and the BTC relay. So implementation-wise, on the Bitcoin side, we just have a regular transaction towards the issuer. Alternatively, we use an HTLC construct for issuing. On the Ethereum side, we use Solidity to create our treasury contract, which inherits the functionality of ERC20, like the standard get balance, transfer from functions. The most tricky part, I guess, here is the BTC relay. So we are currently relying on the old Serpent implementation, and we are gradually rebuilding it in Solidity to get the functionality back. Some of you folks might be aware of it's being quite an old implementation, and there's some improvements also in the EVM then. As you can see, there's a lot of transactions happening on-chain. So we propose two different optimizations to essentially reduce the load on-chain and trade that off with trusting on some specific entities. So the first optimization is we can use an SGX relay. So assuming you trust Intel with their trusted execution environment, you might actually use SGX as the SPV proof client. And then you can, instead of using the BTC relay, get your confirmation of having the Bitcoin transactions that we require being mined in the Bitcoin blockchain from that SGX implementation. A further cost optimization is if we implement the whole issuer, including the chain relay functionality in one trusted execution environment. And this is basically inspired by previous work on Tesseract, for example, who want to build a decentralized exchange solely on trusted execution environments with SGX. So we built this implementation, and then we analyzed basically the cost. And as you can see up here, we have the two different issue protocols. HTLC issuing is a bit more expensive than the collateralized commit, but there's a trade-off. So in HTLC, you don't have to provide a collateral as Alice. So like depending on what you prefer, you might use the HTLC or you might provide collateral. Our trading or transfer is pretty simple, so that's just an update in a Ethereum smart contract, and then the redeeming is down here. So our optimizations, if we use SGX for issuing in both relay and the centralized SGX issuer, we get about 35% reduction in cost, and if we use SGX relay for the redeem, we get about 30% reduction in terms of transactions and 75 in the SGX issuer case. An additional cost that we have to consider also is to keep BTC relay up to date. So we need to submit the current Bitcoin block headers to the Ethereum BTC relay contract, which in our analysis comes about 25 million gas per day, which translates to $27 a day of additional cost. There's a couple of security challenges that we're facing. So you could imagine that there's infrastructure denial of service attacks or Eclipse attacks on either the relay or the issuer. So in that case, the issuer might not be able to actually see that somebody wants to redeem the tokens, or the relay can actually not relay the proof that transactions have been included, and that will be very bad for our protocol. So in the practical implementation, we imagine that there will be multiple relays and multiple issuers that actually work together, so it would be more costly to execute such attacks and just less likely. The next point we have is with most of these collateralized protocols, if we have a strong volatility in the cryptocurrencies we are using, we might actually have a problem because, well, say the Ethereum price drops rapidly and Bitcoin goes up, our collateral, even if we over-collateralize, might not be enough, so our collateralization must really be quite high to cover against these cases. Next, we don't have finality in Bitcoin and Ethereum at the moment, so we might have forking attacks or just regular chain reorganizations. So as a lot of other previous research already suggested, we might need to adjust our contestation periods dynamically based on the value that we actually want to transfer within a single transaction. Last but not least, privacy is a bit of an issue that we need to work around. So say I redeem my tokens and then I start linking my Bitcoin and my Ethereum address together, and I might not want that because I want to keep my identity somewhat private. That way you could just create new addresses on Bitcoin or your Ethereum. You might also use encryption and mixing service with our treasury contract. And as part of future work, we are also considering more advanced cryptography techniques like zero-knowledge proofs or ring signatures. Which brings us to our last point, future work.
So, I mean, this is work in progress, more or less. So the protocol here represented is kind of a first step towards a larger infrastructure. And we've already talked about issuer committees, that we need multiple issuers and relayers. We have a few challenges there. And we've also talked about exchange rate stabilization. Specifically, we're currently looking into an interactive renegotiation protocol for the issuer's collateral. Now, the most interesting challenges, however, are the feasibility of chain relays and multi-signatures. So let's talk about chain relays quickly. So BTC relay is kind of expensive to maintain, right? We all know that. So there has been previous work on so-called verifier games, which move the computations off-chain and require users to construct the execution paths. And then in case there's a disagreement, users have to prove in a verifier game who was wrong and who was right, and this allows us kind of to reconstruct the correct solution. Now the difference in our case is that we actually have the solution before, right? Because we know which Bitcoin transaction we want to prove. We have the truth in the Bitcoin blockchain or any other system. So we might be able to reduce the costs and difficulty of these solutions in our case. Furthermore, we're also looking into more compact proofing techniques. We've heard about some things yesterday and today. Another one which is worth mentioning are non-interactive proofs of proof of work. So we're closely following that, and yeah, we'll hopefully include this in our implementation as well. And finally, multi-signatures. So of course, the solution that seems straightforward would be, instead of sending the money, the Bitcoin, direct to the issuer, why don't we create a multi-sig between me and the issuer when I create the tokens? Now the thing is, this does not give us much better security guarantees, right? It prevents the issuer from stealing the coins, but he might as well just go offline. Now, this is a liveness failure in distributed systems terms. However, I still lose my coins, right? Because they're gone, so it's kind of also a safety issue. Now, to mitigate this, we could require the issuer to lock Bitcoin collateral as well in the same multi-sig output. Now, the challenge here, and this is what we're looking at, is to then have the redeeming phase is a bit more complicated and requires an interactive protocol, which we have not yet implemented, but we're looking into that. Furthermore, using multi-signatures reduces the fungibility properties of the tokens, because if I have a multi-signature with the issuer and I want to trade these tokens to Dominik, what I essentially have to do, I have to replace myself with him in the multi-sig. So I need to construct the Bitcoin transaction, sign it, and send it to him. The issuer can sign these transactions later, of course. But the thing is, I'm basically reconstructing the whole transaction chain on the Ethereum side. Now, we can avoid this by applying a UTXO grouping scheme, but this is interactive, right? Because if you imagine a tree of a Merkle tree, or a tree in general of spent outputs of the tokens, essentially, if I'm the first one who created the tokens, I have to go online and sign the new UTXO, which is basically groups together all the transaction chains. Now, if I'm offline, this is kind of not really feasible. So, however, this may be interesting for payment channels, where we assume that there's an out-of-bound channel between the parties, and this also reduces the costs for the on-chain storage. So this is kind of what we're looking into right now. I think, given the previous presentations, this is something which definitely is interesting, and we're, of course, looking for collaborators and, yeah, open to suggestions. So thanks for your attention. Briefly to mention, so we have a preprint available. We have a poster about the multisigs. We have a Slack channel which you can join for our center and ask questions there, or you contact us directly. Thanks.
Okay, we have about 5 minutes for questions.
Thank you for your presentation. I was wondering, I think the smart contract somehow needs to know the exchange rate between Bitcoin and Ethereum, and what would prevent the issuer from lying about that exchange rate and thus like basically not needing any collateral?
Of course, that's a very valid question. So in our paper, we assume that we have an oracle that kind of that gives us this exchange rate. there's multiple ways to implement these things. You can like use Oracleize, which attests you that it indeed retrieved the exchange rate from a public service. But in general, exchange rates are kind of market-driven, right? And they depend on the exchange that we have. So potentially, you could also query a decentralized exchange on Ethereum for these exchange rates. But yeah, that is indeed an issue we're looking into as well. Yeah.
Hi, thanks for the presentation. I have a question. Did you consider like looking into, for example, RSK? That way you would eliminate the whole problem with the exchange rate for Ethereum, because it's essentially like running Ethereum as a sidechain on Bitcoin. So.
Yeah, so we've looked into RSK. The thing is that, I mean, there's two versions, right, of rootstock, kind of going on in parallel as far as I'm aware. One of them needs a soft fork. For the other, I'm not quite sure how it's to be deployed, but essentially they select a committee, right? From
Yeah, I think they have like a federated sidechain.
So the challenge here is how do you select a committee, right? You can use so you can use like schemes as in Bitcoin, as we heard today, from selected from proof of work, but essentially you like rely on the security properties of the underlying system. Now the thing is that once you select a committee, for this moment it's kind of permission. So you rely on miners on the Bitcoin side. It would in principle work, and this is kind of, we talked about having issuer committees indeed. So this will be one version to have to spread trust among issuers. Yeah, but the thing is, our scheme will be applicable to more than just Bitcoin, right? It's more general.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, maybe to add to that, the essential idea is independent of whatever chain we're considering. It was like cross-chain, so Ethereum is essentially just an example. Of course, it's much easier if you have already a chain that's like bound to the other one. The tricky part we try to do is getting the chains that are not connected yet somehow connected on a trustless scheme.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. This is actually a little bit similar, but it's different enough that I think I should still ask it for the first question. As far as you were talking about perhaps having an oracle that would tell the price between Bitcoin and Ethereum. I was wondering if maybe this, as like a stepping stone to the final vision of what this is going towards, maybe you could work together with some centralized exchanges to do the oracle, or are you completely not interested in that? And if it's like completely decentralized, all or nothing type deal, like what are you guys' thoughts on that? I say this being an employee at a centralized exchange.
I mean, I guess for the first step, given that 99% of the trades happen on centralized exchanges, and they would give you a much precise exchange rate, I guess working together would make sense at first. I mean, we don't say that it's completely bad and we want to replace them completely. This is just a proposal of how you can do this without trusting in a single party.
Yeah. Yeah, I just mean like, yeah, I think a lot of people who think up these decentralized exchange protocols feel like that centralized exchange people are like the enemy kind of thing, but we're totally excited about it too. So I mean, like if you want to talk to us, we could like kind of help you guys out if you want to do a test run on one of our, places. So I think that's totally fine.
Cool, thanks, awesome.
Hi, thanks for the presentation. My question is about how you deal with permanent chain splits. Like if there's another Ethereum Classic or Bcash, or how do you deal with that?
That's a very good question. But essentially what would happen, so you would have now two locks, right, on the Bitcoin side. So we have actually, to be honest, not considered this in too much detail because we have temporary chain splits, we have a contestation period. Now what you could do is you could resubmit these transactions again. Now the challenge here, and this is also one of the things that which you can do even with one Bitcoin chain without splits, is you can try to do double issuing, where you have multiple contracts on the Ethereum side. So this is why we'd have to specify the specific treasury contract in the upper turn, for example. Now you can do the same thing the other way around. You can specify and identify that you're issuing specifically for Bitcoin or for Bitcoin Cash, Bitcoin Gold, whatever. Of course, this logic needs to be handled in the contract as well. But in principle, I mean, you just basically mirror the side chain or on Ethereum. So yeah.
Okay, we have 1 minute left if anyone wants a very quick question. Okay, thank you very much.
So that concludes most of our sessions, and the next one we have workshops essentially, and it's split into these 6 rooms. And can I get the leaders for each? Okay, well, 20-minute break and then the workshop. So I'll explain before you guys leave on your break. And here, can I have like the leaders of each of the group? Oh, in 20 minutes? Oh, okay. Okay then. So 20-minute break, and we'll reconvene here at 3:20. Okay. And this list is also available on the site if you want to check it out beforehand. So.